Hello again everybody, and today I'm going to talk about the Roman poet Catullus, still very much a live wire as you will hear, and a poet with something to say to us. So he was born in the region of Verona in around about in the mid-80s BC. He came from a fairly wealthy family, from the equestrian family, which is the second richest class in Roman society, and his family had, his father had a villa at a place called Sirmione, now in Italian, Sirmio in Latin, which is promontory on the southern end of Lake Garda. It's a very beautiful spot and still somewhere that makes the most of its connections with Catullus. So he was born there, but he was sent to Rome at a fairly early age for his education, and he, from early on in his life, he associated with the friends of the rich and the famous. So he knew various famous names, including people such as Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great, and indeed Cicero. And all of these are mentioned, generally not very favourably, in his poetry. So he was very much influenced by earlier poets, particularly Greek poets from what's called the Alexandrian school. The poet Callimachus was chief amongst these, but he's also very much influenced by a much earlier Greek poet, or a poetess, who was called Sappho, and she came from the island of Lesbos in the 7th century BC. And as you will hear in a minute, he was particularly indebted to Sappho. So Catullus wrote in various styles, as well as the lyrical styles. He also wrote some epigrammatic poetry, very short poems, generally much obscene and abusive, but he also wrote some epic poetry, including the very famous poem number 64, which is about over 400 lines long. There used to be two common editions of Catullus's poetry available in Britain. One was the complete works of Catullus, and the other was occasionally known as the Catholic Girls' School edition, because all the more juicy poems, more abusive poems, were left out. Catullus was obviously a very passionate man, and this very much comes out in his poetry. Some of it is really obscene, some is amusingly so, some of it's just offensive. The love poetry that he wrote, however, particularly the poetry which details, or you can trace the affair that he had with a rich woman, is very much portrays that intensity of emotion. There's one poem I'm going to talk about a little in a minute on that. So he, if you want to know more about the woman that he had an affair with, the best place is probably the novels of Stephen Saylor and Robert Harris. She was called Clodia, and she was the wife of Metellus, came from one of the noblest, perhaps the noblest Roman family of all, and Catullus had an affair, as did apparently many other men had an affair. Perhaps some women also had an affair with Clodia. He wrote about this, and well, in the end, like the other affairs that she had, eventually it bit the dust. And when he'd written this, perhaps towards the end of the affair, he wrote this poem. So I'm going to give you this first in Latin, and then in an English translation. It's written in elegiac couplets. It's an elegiac couplet. It's 2 lines long, and it goes: Odi et amo, quare faciam fortasse requiris, nescio, sed fieri sentio, et excrucio. And in English, I hate and I love. Why do I do this, perhaps you ask? I don't know, but I feel it happening, and I am tortured by it. So it's an elegiac couplet. It's notable for the intensity of its expression. In a poem of this many words, or in a sentence of this many words, you'd expect 1, maybe 2 main verbs at most. In these 2 lines, there are no fewer than 8 verbs, and 5 of those verbs are to do with intensity of emotion. So I hate, I love, I don't know, I'm tortured. All of those are in there. Also interesting, in the first line, the verbs are active verbs, so I hate and I love, but in the second line, when he starts off, I don't know, I feel it happening, so he's passive in this, and I am tortured by it, he's passive in that action too. So the verbs are very intense, there's a lot of them. The choice of vocabulary is interesting. There's nothing half-hearted about any of this stuff. I hate is how it starts off, and it finishes up, I am tortured by it. So it very much shows that intensity of feeling. If you want to know more of those love poems of Catullus, then do go look for them. There's some great poetry in there. So what three things shall we think about for messages from Catullus for today? Well, the first is the importance of poetry. You can say a lot in a little, multum in parvo, as it says in Latin. The second, Catullus is very, very good at encapsulating the human experience, in this case the intensity of the demise of an affair. And the third, if you search for Catullus court case, you'll discover that if you want an educated insult, Catullus is still very much your man.